At 3:40 a.m. on June 22, 1941, the Operational Department of the Northwestern Front headquarters recorded a disruption in wired communication with the forward units of the 8th and 11th Armies. According to archival document number 0014, stored in the Central Archive of the Ministry of Defense, initial reports contained information about massive artillery impact on communication nodes in the area of responsibility of the Baltic Special Military District. The technical condition of the Northwestern Front's material park at the beginning of hostilities was characterized by a high degree of wear of old-type tanks and a critical shortage of auxiliary transport. The 12th Mechanized Corps, under the command of Major General Shestoperov Nikolai Mikhailovich, had 791 tanks, the overwhelming majority of which were light BT-7 and T-26 vehicles. The 3rd Mechanized Corps of Major General Kurkin Alexei Vasilyevich had 660 tanks, including 109 new heavy Klim Voroshilov 1 and Klim Voroshilov 2 vehicles, as well as 50 medium T-34 tanks. The total resource of engine hours for V2 engines on heavy tanks averaged less than 50% of the standard. The front's logistical infrastructure relied on depots in Kaunas, Vilnius, and Šiauliai. However, in the first 4 hours of the conflict, railway junctions were subjected to strikes by the aviation of the 2nd Air Fleet of the Luftwaffe, which paralyzed the supply of fuel, lubricants, and ammunition. By 7 a.m. on June 22, 1941, the front commander, Colonel General Kuznetsov Fyodor Izidorovich, ordered the advance of Mechanized Corps to counterattack the advancing units of the 4th Panzer Group of the Wehrmacht. According to Directive Number 2, the goal was to destroy the enemy in the Suwalki region, which technically did not correspond to the current location of German mobile formations. The 2nd Tank Division of the 3rd Mechanized Corps, under the command of Major General Solyankin Yegor Nikolaevich, began its march from the Raseiniai area towards Raseiniai. The route length was 80 kilometers. Fuel consumption for a heavy Klim Voroshilov tank, when moving on dirt roads of the Lithuanian lowlands, reached 350 liters per 100 kilometers. With a fuel tank capacity of 600 liters and no refuelers in the columns, the division exhausted its mobile fuel reserve before entering combat contact. The combat log of the German 6th Tank Division recorded that the first enemy reconnaissance patrols reached the Dubisa River by the end of June 22nd, capturing the bridges intact. Here, the first serious discrepancy between archival data and the actual state of supply is revealed. Reports from the Northwestern Front headquarters indicated that the 12th Mechanized Corps was supplied with ammunition for 2 combat refills. A later audit of the depots in Šiauliai showed a lack of 76mm shells for the F-32 and F-34 cannons, with which the Klim Voroshilov and T-34 tanks were armed. Crews went into battle with primarily high-explosive fragmentation shells in their ammunition load, which were ineffective against enemy armored vehicles at distances exceeding 500 meters. Coordination between the 2nd and 12th Mechanized Corps was absent due to the failure of the 71 TK-3 radio stations installed on commanders' vehicles. The low quality of ignition system shielding created interference that made voice communication impossible when the engine was running. On June 23, 1941, Solyankin's 2nd Tank Division struck units of the Wehrmacht's 6th Tank Division north of Raseiniai. The technical superiority of the Klim Voroshilov tanks became a factor of tactical surprise. German 37mm Pak-36 anti-tank guns could not penetrate the 75mm thick armor even when firing at point-blank range. Colonel Erhard Raus's memoirs describe an instance where one Soviet tank withstood over 40 hits from 37mm shells without losing combat capability. However, this technical advantage was negated by a failure of command and control. While individual groups of tanks pierced the enemy's defenses, the division's rear services were scattered by attacks from Junkers 87 dive bombers. 50 trucks carrying fuel for Solyankin's tanks were destroyed on the road 10 kilometers from the front line. By the morning of June 24, 1941, the situation in the Raseiniai area had reached a critical point. It was during this period that the incident with a single Klim Voroshilov 1 tank occurred, which took up a position at a road intersection, cutting off the supply line of the German 6th Tank Division. This episode, which later became a central element of heroic legend, from the perspective of operational analysis, was a consequence of the tank losing communication with its unit. The vehicle remained in position not as part of a strategic plan, but due to the impossibility of continuing to move with the battalion, which was already retreating due to lack of fuel. The solitary Klim Voroshilov blocked the movement of Raus's group's convoys for 22 hours, destroying 12 trucks and several anti-tank guns. The German command was forced to use 88mm Flak 36 anti-aircraft guns to suppress this strong point. 5 hits from 88mm armor-piercing shells disabled the vehicle, and the crew fell in battle. While the attention of the German headquarters was temporarily diverted by this incident, the main body of forces of the Northwestern Front was in a state of technical collapse. The 2nd Tank Division, having lost almost all its medium and light tanks in the battles of June 23rd and 24th, found itself encircled. Attempts to organize a relief strike by forces of the 12th Mechanized Corps failed due to a topographical planning error. Shestoperov's 2nd Tank Division was directed through swampy terrain in the area of the Venta River, where light BT-7 tanks massively became stuck in the soft ground, expending the remaining fuel in attempts at self-extrication. As a result, 37 vehicles were abandoned by their crews due to the impossibility of evacuation. On staff maps, this area was marked as passable for mechanized columns, which indicates a second fundamental error in intelligence and cartographic support of the front headquarters. An analysis of the state of the 5th Tank Division, part of the 3rd Mechanized Corps, shows a similar picture. The division, commanded by Colonel Fyodorov Ivan Semyonovich, engaged in battle in the Elitis area. Here, Soviet tank crews encountered the Wehrmacht's 7th Tank Division. Despite having T-34 tanks, the unit lost 70% of its materiel in 12 hours of combat. The main reason was the lack of interaction with supporting artillery. The division's artillery regiments lacked traction equipment, as tractors from the Chelyabinsk plant had been confiscated for the needs of the national economy 2 weeks before the start of the war, and were not returned on time. Heavy 152mm howitzers remained in their parks, without firing a single shot at the advancing enemy. By the end of June 25, 1941, the Northwestern Front had virtually ceased to exist as an organized military force. The 3rd Mechanized Corps was completely encircled in the forests east of Raseiniai. Major General Solyankin lost his life attempting to break out of the encirclement. Along with him, the remnants of the division's staff were either incapacitated or captured. Equipment losses were total. Of the 109 Klim Voroshilov tanks available at the start of the battle, only 2 vehicles reached their own lines. The rest were either knocked out or blown up by their own crews due to lack of fuel. In official Soviet reports of that time, information about the loss of 2 full-fledged mechanized corps in 4 days was replaced by the laconic phrase about stubborn battles in the Šiauliai direction. Here, a third discrepancy in sources should be noted. German reports from the 4th Panzer Group record the capture of over 200 serviceable or slightly damaged Soviet tanks in the Raseiniai and Jonava areas. At the same time, Soviet archival documents write off these vehicles as irretrievable losses during direct confrontations. This indicates a systemic crisis in repair detachments and technical support units. Tanks with minor chassis malfunctions or damage to observation devices were abandoned due to the lack of spare parts and evacuation tractors like the Voroshilovets. The road capacity in the retreat zone was clogged with unorganized streams of refugees and rear units, which precluded the maneuver of repair units. Logistical analysis shows that the daily fuel requirement of the 3rd Mechanized Corps for diesel fuel was 420 tons. In fact, between June 22nd and June 25th, the units received less than 80 tons. Thus, the technical capability for active defense was exhausted on the 2nd day of the conflict. The Front Command, represented by General Kuznetsov, continued to issue orders for an offensive, ignoring reports of 0 fuel reserves. This led to the newest equipment being used as stationary firing points in open terrain, where it became an easy target for German aviation and heavy artillery. The legend of the solitary KV-1 at Raseiniai became an ideal tool for masking the scale of the catastrophe. Focusing attention on a single episode of self-sacrifice allowed avoiding questions about why entire tank regiments, equipped with the best technology in the world at that time, ceased to exist without significantly impacting the pace of the Wehrmacht's advance. The speed of the 4th Panzer Group's advance under Hoppner was up to 30 kilometers per day, which corresponded to the pre-war plans of the German General Staff. The heroism of individual crews was a forced reaction to the systemic failure of the High Command, which failed to provide elementary conditions for the functioning of armored formations. The final statistics of losses for the Northwestern Front during the first week of the war amounted to over 40,000 personnel and more than 1,200 tanks. The front line rolled back 300 kilometers deep into the country's territory. The city of Kaunas was abandoned on June 24th, Vilnius on the same day. The loss of the Baltic states led to Leningrad and the supply routes of the Baltic Fleet coming under threat. The economic damage from the loss of production facilities in Riga and other industrial centers of the region at that time could not be precisely calculated. Considering the Battle of Raseiniai as a military technical incident, it must be acknowledged that in the pre-war years, Soviet industry was able to create weapons superior to enemy counterparts. The Klim Voroshilov tank technically dominated the battlefield. However, the military machine as a whole, as a combination of communication, supply, reconnaissance, and command, proved uncompetitive. Attempts to close logistical gaps with the personal courage of crews only prolonged the agony of individual units. The propagandistic emphasis on a single tank allowed for the creation of a convenient historical myth, which for decades obscured the dry figures of the total defeat of 2 armies. A critical audit of the front headquarters' decisions shows that Colonel General Kuznetsov acted within the regulations of 1939, which presumed maneuver warfare with stable communications and air superiority. Neither of these was ensured by the start of the battle for Raseiniai. The absence of anti-aircraft cover for mechanized columns led to the loss of 40% of vehicles while still on the march. Without fuel trucks and ammunition trucks, Soviet tank divisions turned into a cluster of expensive metal, neutralized not so much by enemy fire as by the lack of basic resources. The dry outcome of the battle is that technical superiority alone is not a guarantee of victory. The Battle of Raseiniai became a clear demonstration of how decentralized supply and a shattered command system devalue any engineering achievements. The lone tank that held up the Germans for a day was merely a bright flash against the backdrop of a complete blackout of the front. While dispatches were being compiled in Berlin and Moscow, thousands of tank crews in the Lithuanian forests were trying to start the engines of empty tanks, understanding that their only option would be to disable the equipment and attempt to escape on foot. In this context, Raseiniai is not only a place of heroism, but also a place of large-scale technical and managerial bankruptcy that changed the course of the initial period of the war. On June 26, 1941, the operational report of the headquarters of the 12th Mechanized Corps recorded the presence of 35 BT-7 tanks in service and the absence of ammunition for them. The personnel were reclassified as infantry and began retreating towards the borders of the RSFSR. At the same time, in the rear areas of Lithuania, mopping up operations continued against encircled groups, who, due to the lack of radio communication, were not even aware of the depth of the enemy's breakthrough. The technical accuracy of archival data confirms that the defeat of the Northwestern Front was a natural consequence of a logistical imbalance that could not be corrected by the heroism of 1 or 10 heavy tank crews. During further advances, German troops used abandoned Soviet KVs as captured vehicles, first replacing their radio stations with German Fu-5 models. This emphasizes the fact that even the enemy recognized the high quality of Soviet armor, while simultaneously noting the critical weakness of the Soviet communication system. A tank without a radio and fuel ceased to be a combat unit, turning into an obstacle on the road. This is precisely what happened near Raseiniai, where the legend of the invulnerable monster was born from the helplessness of an entire front to provide one vehicle with fuel and targeting. By June 30, 1941, the remnants of the 3rd and 12th Mechanized Corps were officially disbanded. Personnel who had broken out of encirclement were directed to form new units. The material base of the front was destroyed by more than 90%. These figures are the final and most accurate evidence of what happened in June 1941 in the Baltic states. The logistical failure, compounded by panic at headquarters, led to the loss of strategic initiative in the northern direction for many years to come. Ammunition expenditure statistics for the first 3 days of the battle at Raseiniai show that the average number of shells fired per Klim Voroshilov tank gun did not exceed 10 rounds. This is negligibly small for a large-scale battle, and confirms the thesis that most vehicles were lost not in an artillery duel, but due to the inability to continue operations. The German 6th Panzer Division, in contrast, maintained its rate of fire through the uninterrupted operation of supply convoys, which moved across captured bridges over the Dubisa. The difference in logistical approaches became a decisive factor that even the most protected tank could not outweigh. Thus, a historical reconstruction of the events of June 41st in the Raseiniai area requires abandoning the mythologization of individual episodes in favor of a detailed study of supply documents and combat logs. Only through an analysis of road capacity, fire density, and the condition of repair bases can the true reason for the collapse of the Northwestern Front be understood. The technical power of the Soviet Union, in the form of heavy Klim Voroshilov tanks, became a hostage to incompetence in matters of supply and communication, which predetermined the scale of the catastrophe, a scale that is still often hidden behind the legend of a single heroic crew at a crossroads. In conclusion, it should be noted that the field reports of the German 6th Panzer Division, compiled in July 41st, contain detailed schemes for bypassing heavy Soviet tanks. German tank groups did not engage in protracted battles with KVs if they did not block key highways. They simply bypassed them, leaving immobilized vehicles to the care of infantry and heavy artillery. This once again confirms that the tactical value of a single tank in a shattered front tends towards zero, no matter how powerful its armor. The tragedy at Raseiniai is a lesson that modern warfare is won not by the thickness of steel, but by the speed of information transfer and the uninterrupted supply of fuel to tanks. The figures for irreparable losses of equipment of the Northwestern Front for June 1941 are still being clarified by historians, but the range remains within 1,000 to 1,200 units. The overwhelming majority of these vehicles did not have combat damage incompatible with the life of their aggregates. They were abandoned due to technical malfunctions that, in peacetime, would have been rectified by the crew in 2 hours. But in the chaos and lack of spare parts, these 2 hours turned into an eternity, and the tanks into monuments to failed mobilization and destroyed logistics. Archival data from the headquarters of the 11th Army, which operated south of Raseiniai, confirmed that on June 25th, the last radio message arrived from the combat area demanding, "Fuel! Give us fuel!" After that, communication was cut off forever. This brief message is a more accurate epitaph to the tank forces of the Baltic Military District than any subsequent descriptions of heroic raids. The technical analysis is complete. The facts indicate that the Battle of Raseiniai was lost even before the first shot, at the moment when the first German aircraft destroyed the first communication node and the first oil depot in the border zone. Studying this operation through the prism of archives allows us to see beyond the pathos of the war years the real picture of mechanized combat of the 1940s. It was a battle not only of people, but also of systems. And in this clash of systems, Soviet logistics of June 1941 suffered a crushing defeat, which even the legendary Klim Voroshilov tank, standing to the death on the Lithuanian road, could not compensate for. Its armor withstood the shells, but the system that created it could not withstand the test of the reality of a great war. By the end of June 1941, the Northwestern Front had turned into an infantry formation, deprived of heavy weapons and communications, which predetermined the further development of events in the Leningrad direction. The dry lines of reports on equipment write-offs remain the most eloquent testimony of that period, when steel was strong and supply was ephemeral. This study closes the question of the causes of the defeat, leaving room only for facts, documented and topographically confirmed on the ground. The Battle of Raseiniai will forever remain in history as an example of how, in modern warfare, technology without logistics is just a pile of dead metal, regardless of its structural perfection.